Hello, welcome back. So we're going to move on to the behavior portion. How are we going to teach written expression? By using behavior. Behavior is a foundational component for good literacy instruction. But let's define that word first so we're all on the same page. Behavior. The way in which one acts or conducts oneself, especially toward others. So I'm not necessarily talking about a specific kind of behavior, but all behavior. Behavior is communication. Behavior is communication because the action we do toward another person is telling them if we like or don't like something. An action or behavior can communicate a variety of thoughts and feelings. Who has ever sat next to someone and that person scooted over a little bit to make room for you? That action can take on different meanings, like, hey, I'll make room for you, or I don't want to be too close to you. What did you notice that gives you a clue as to the meaning of the behavior? Probably a facial expression and a gesture that allowed you to interpret the meaning behind the person's actions. We've all experienced that actions speak louder than words. We also need to be aware how we are reinforcing a behavior by our own actions, because our behavior is communicating to our students. Even when you don't say words, your actions are speaking. Your actions are telling a student, you're important. I want to hear what you have to say. I'm not really sure what you're saying to me. I don't understand. You need to be careful how you respond to a student's attempts to communicate. You want to encourage the positive behavioral interactions that are going to lead to and increase meaningful literacy experiences. Remember that these interactions can lead to those meaningful experiences, which then in turn increase the literacy experiences. As we think about behavior is communication, and the communication is part of literacy, I would like us to begin to think about Downing's idea that communication can be shaped into a variety of expressive forms. For example, students can write with magnetic letters, draw pictures, use photos, software programs, even objects to write with. So if we can see and understand that the communicative form that the student is using, then we can define its meaning or intent. In other words, once we know the form of the student's expressions, then we can begin to understand what the student meant behind the behavior. Downing's work also reminds us, if we can clearly define that behavior, then we can measure it, as all of you know. If you can measure the behavior, then you know if you have a specific instruction that's working or not, because you can see the progress. Remember that sometimes the behavior can be very, very small. So we need to be very clear and define our parameters. In Downing, Erickson and Hatch and Clendon, and Johnson, Reichel, Feely, and Jones, and many others, they give examples of clear definitions that can measure a targeted behavior. And if we want to measure a student's ability to demonstrate increased comprehension of concepts or increased understanding of how to use that technology, for example, then we need to know what behavior we are looking for in that student. And once we are very clear on the behavior that we're going to measure, then we can take our baseline and begin our instructional strategy. So for students with significant and multiple disabilities, using assistive technology is going to be a very important part of the supporting behavioral communication. If the behavior is activating a switch, we need to define under what condition that they're going to activate that switch. And if the behavior is pointing to an icon or using their eyes to gaze and select an icon symbol, we need to define how that will look so you can clearly and effectively measure that progress. Erickson, Hatch, and Clendon's report, using a single message device programmed with a message that supported open-ended commenting and initiation rather than specific responses, increased the number of successful interactions with more literate others during these activities. For example, a single message switch that says a comment like, "I know that. Tell me more. What do you think?" can be almost universally used in a classroom activity. When having this kind of technology available, it allows an increased number of opportunities to initiate a comment and interact socially, which we know will then give more meaning to that experience. By maximizing the number of successful interactions, according to Erickson, Hatch, and Clendon, we will reinforce the desired behavior. By reinforcing this desired behavior, then we can move forward with our literacy instruction, potentially increasing to a sequenced message or a more complex communicative behavior. Goals are to be written in a measurable, observable framework. There are different acronyms that can help us make sure that there is a measurable criteria. I learned the Rumba method myself, but whatever method you use, keep in mind that the goal is that it has to be relevant to the student's needs, is understandable by someone who doesn't even know the student. It has to be measurable, so what's your criteria? The behavior has to be observable and recognized by somebody who wouldn't know the student. And then, is that achievable for that student? When we look at these two goals, which ones are measurable? Jacob will comment about a book independently, or by May 25, 2015, Connor will use his single switch device to make 5 statements or comments during a story being read to him 4 out of 5 data collection days. Whew, that second one has a lot of information to keep track of and be aware of. But I hope you said the second one, because it has an observable behavior that can be counted under certain conditions. The first goal doesn't really define when he will comment, how he'll make the comment, verbally or with an voice output device. And there is one time enough. Is that going to be meeting the goal that he did it, one time you made a comment? Or do we want to see it happen many, many times? And the second one, of course, the student's using the switch to make a comment. And then it tells us when we should start counting and when we should stop counting, because we've defined during story time. So when he's being read a story, that's when we can start and stop our counting. And then he's activating the switch. So yes, 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 when you mark a positive when he hits the switch. Then over time, the staff will know whether the student's making progress or not with the communication aspects. So as you can see with this goal, if you set up a data sheet with pre-programmed comments on the device or statements that are generic enough to be used with any book because the core language is universal, so having comments on it like, "I like that, read more, what happens next?" This would be appropriate in almost any story situation. With this, you can see how often the student comments, and if you note like which books were being read at the time, you might even begin to see a pattern for a preference, like, liking silly books versus, documentary type books. So for written expression, let's take a look at what a goal might look like for written expression. By the end of the year, IEP year, Ben will use an alternative pencil system, selecting 5 letters during a journal writing, 3 of 5 data collection days. Or another one might be, by the end of the IEP year, Jenny will write in her adapted planner by placing 3 icons in her schedule in order with no more than 2 verbal prompts during an opening session, 1 out of 5 data collection days. So can you envision right now a student would have an adapted planner that they would put pictures into and that they're going to be laid out, and she, has learned her routine, and can she take from the selection the first three icons that need to go on her checklist in her planner so she can write her system out for the day. Then you would have your data sheet looking at that. And we've got the date, the number of icons, and you can note how many prompts you had to give that day as you helped her create her schedule for the day. And as you work with that student at writing her own schedule and reviewing her to-do list, she is practicing writing in a very meaningful way. This process often leads to meaningful communication interactions, which in turn would give depth to that literacy experience. Or for some of our students, learning the meaning of certain behaviors or facilitating certain kinds of behaviors takes a lot of staff energy and a lot of time and effort. In Foley, Copenhaver, and Williams' work, they recommend creating an assessment portfolio document to measure progress and future assessment data. So this ongoing portfolio can help future teams not recreate the wheel, because as you know, this goes beyond the IEP document. This additional documentation can be invaluable for future staff. In addition, taking photos and videos of setups and work systems and communication boards and the techniques that elicit skills, this will save a student and staff tons of time and trouble in the future. Because whatever we can convey to that next team, they don't have to relearn about that student. And I'm sure that we've all experienced how limiting and what you can document in the IEP itself. Here are some examples of photos that might be included in a portfolio with a brief explanation of how each tool was used. And as time goes on, a copy of data sheets might be helpful for future staff, in addition to making copies for the family that can be extremely helpful to be able to understand the instructional strategies that are effective at school. Sometimes these strategies can even be implemented in the home setting, making life easier for family by supporting the behavioral communication pieces, as well as increasing the number of opportunities that student will have with many more literacy experiences. I'm going to show you Brianna's portfolio. On Brianna's portfolio, her mom has developed this through a Google Wiki site. It gave her a place to start short video demonstrations, how to elicit communication and written responses, and her staff support has changed over the years. In addition, it has been a great place to store more formal documentation and more about literacy instruction and communication for students with significant learning challenges. So if the staff needed background information, it was easily available here. This has also made it easy to not lose a notebook or information that should be in a notebook, and it's also accessible then to multiple people at one time without recreating additional materials. Now I'm going to show you Jake's portfolio online and how it's just another system, but it looks very different. As I'm quickly scanning through to show you just the different parts of this wiki site, I'm hoping you're getting a sense of how much more depth and breadth of information I can convey to demonstrate how I can set up activities and how much more independent Jake can be when I do X, Y, or Z. A picture, it really is worth 1,000 words. When we take the time to understand the meaning of communicative behaviors, as well as shaping and forming these behaviors with students, we can help students learn skills that not only support communication and social interaction, but also help them engage in meaningful literacy experiences. When students engage in these meaningful literacy experiences, we are providing them access to language and literacy. Okay, you should have been able to download the All About Me form from the helpful handout section on the webpage. There is a section on that, Preferences, Strengths, and Interests, which can help us reinforce the behaviors we're looking for. And if you want to take about 3 to 5 minutes to think about your student and jot down what you know about his or her preferences and interests, use those questions on that handout to help guide your thinking process. These preferences and strengths are going to help build the foundation for your behavior goal for writing. Then, after you've completed that part, I want you to take another 5 minutes or so using that All About Me form. I want you to think about a measurable writing goal for your student. You should have already kind of defined activities that are meaningful and things that are preferences and interest. The current communication system, which helps to know where you are so you can start thinking about where you want to go with that. If it isn't complete or detailed enough, or you don't feel like you have enough background information on that student, don't worry, we can work on this later, and it'll be very important that you work with your other team members.